Gopijana Balabha Girivardhari Gopijana Bhagnabha Girivardhari Sodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yamanatiravana Chadi Jamunatiravana Chadi Raya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Adi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Adi Gopijana Balabha Girivardhari Gopijana Balabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jamanatiravana Chadi Jamunatiravana Chadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Adi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hare Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivijagacharya Astatarasatasi Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Gaur Premanandi. Okay, please inform me which is the verse for this morning?
9:13:6.
6. 9:13. 6, yes? 9:13:6. No, the short purport. Let's chant verse number 8. So we'll cover 6, 7, and 8. We'll chant responsively text number 8. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Rugno Jivantu Deho Yam. Text number 8, please. Prasanna Prabhavo Yadi Tatet Yukte Nime Praha Mabhun Me Deha Bandhanam Ragyo Jivatu Deho Yam Prasanna Prabhavo Yadi Tatet Yukte Nime Praha Mabhun Me Deha Bandhanam Ragyo Jiveto Deho Yam Prasanna Prabhavo Yadi Tatet Yukte Nimi Praha Mabhun Me Deha Bandhanam Ragyo Jivato Deho Yam Prasanna Prabhavo Yadi Tatet Yukte Nimi Praha Mabhun Me Deha Bandhanam Ragyo Jivato Deho Yam Prasanna Prabhavo Yadi Tatet Yukte Nimi Praha Mabhun Me Deha Bandhanam. Ladies. Ragyo Jivato Deho Yam Prasanna Prabhavo Yadi Tatet Yukte Nimi Praha Mabhun Me Deha Bandhanam. Okay. Ragyaha of the king. Jivatu may again be enlivened. Deha ayam, this body, now preserved. Prasannaha, very much pleased. Prabhavaha, all able to do it. Yadi, if. Tata, let it be so. Iti, thus. Ukte, where it was replied, when it was replied by the demigods. Nimihi, Maharaj Nimi. Praha, said, Ma bhut, do not do it. Me, my, deha bandhanam, imprisonment again in a material body. Translation, if you are satisfied with this sacrifice, and if you are actually able to do so, kindly bring Maharaj Nimi back to life in this body. The demigod said yes to this request by the sages, but Maharaj Nimi said, please do not imprison me again in a material body. Very interesting. Dynasty of Maharaj Nimi, chapter 13. So let's go back. Text 6. Translation. After saying this, Maharaj Nimi, who was expert in the science of spiritual knowledge, gave up his body. Vashishta, the great-grandfather, gave up his body also, but through the semen discharged by Mitra and Varuna, when they saw Urvashi, he was born again. Oh boy. Purport, Mitra and Varuna chanced to meet Urvashi, most beautiful prostitute in the heavenly kingdom, and they became lusty. Because they were great saints, they tried to control their lust, but they could not do so, and thus they discharged semen. The semen was carefully kept in a water pot, and Vishishta was born from it. Pretty incredible. Text 7. During the performance of the yajna, the body relinquished by Maharaj Nimi was preserved in fragrant substances, and at the end of the Satra Yaja, the great saints and brahmanas made the following request to all the demigods and assembled there. Translation, text 8, we read already. If you are satisfied with the sacrifice, and if you are actually able to do so, kindly bring Maharaj Nimi back to life again, back to life, in this body. The demigod said yes to this request by the sages. But Maharaj Nimi said, please do not imprison me again in a material body. Purport. The demigods are in a position many times higher than that of human beings. Therefore, although the great saints and sages were also powerful brahmanas, they requested the demigods to revive Maharaj Nimi's body, which had been preserved in various perfumed balms. One should not think that the demigods are powerful only in enjoying the senses, semicolon. They are also powerful in such deeds as bringing life back to a dead body. There are many similar instances in the Vedic literature. For example, according to the history of Savitri and Satyavan, Satyavan died and was being taken away by Yamaraj. But on the request of his wife Savitri, Satyavan was revived in the same body. This is an important fact about the power of the demigods. Om Ajnana Timbarandasya Kananjana Sadakaya Chakshura Meditam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Svaya Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. There's no elaboration on these interesting events. And the sequence, I mean, there's just taking pieces from the little bit that's here. Great sages, what to speak of ourselves, great sages, from time to time, they have a lapse. Instead of behaving like great sages, they become overwhelmed by their senses. That's one of the little messages here. Urvashi must have been something special. because both Mitra and Varuna, they're powerful. They're not sages, they're demigods, but very powerful. And they discharge semen, just seeing, control the object of the senses. So we could spend some time just discussing the principle that Prabhupada would often speak about again and again and again. Yoga Indriya Samyama. Yoga Indriya Samyama. Yoga means controlling the senses. Say it negative. There's no meaning to yoga without control of the senses. Or, say it positively, the purpose of yoga, one of the purposes of yoga is controlling the senses. Why? Because without controlling the senses, one is living an unregulated animal life. And an unregulated animal life, even in the human form, doesn't permit spiritual realization. We'll say it negative or positive. Controlling the senses has a purpose. Controlling the senses is for the purpose of directing the mind and intelligence and the consciousness of the soul towards the Supreme. So we'll go down, and then there's different methods mentioned in the Vedas. Some like it this way, some like it that way. Different ages, this is recommended, other ages, that is recommended. But the principle is, what's the principle of the Vedas is to know Krishna. And without purity of consciousness, then one isn't going to know Krishna. One can know of Krishna, but one isn't going to know Krishna. So the purpose of sense control, so we're going now to the demigods. So here, this is in verse 6, the demigods became agitated by, these two, became agitated by Urvashi. And then 2 verses later, the powerful demigods are able to bring a living entity back to life who had departed. No, who can do that? Unless one is empowered in specific ways, one can't do that. We can't do that. Most people can't do that. But so back to the storyline. It's not that the sages, if demigods have the power to bring Maharaj Nimi back to life, then the sages don't have the same power? So why would the sages ask the demigods if they already have the power? And the answer is they don't want to waste their power on such activities. And therefore they made a request of the demigods. We'll say it again. Any power that anyone has, the position of these elevated sages, how they become elevated is in Yoga Indriya Samyama. Great austerities for long periods of time, such that there's a strength that comes from regulated activities where the senses are directed. Just like, all of you that are engaged in your services here at the temple, day after day, after day after day, after day after day, for a long period of time, then some Brahma Tejas comes, some spiritual strength comes. And what's the purpose of that spiritual strength? Well, it depends on how life is directed, or depends on buying into the principle of the purpose of life. Modern culture doesn't consider these things. Just a little bit of sharing. After I leave Phoenix, I'm going to the Chicago suburbs, Palatine, and visiting 2 universities. And the young people that are attending those 2 university programs, they're interested in understanding themselves. I'm just now speaking in a broad, general way. But young people want to find themselves. I mean, some young people don't care about anything, but thoughtful young people want to find themselves. And the definition of themselves often comes in terms of what? In terms of their education that builds a career, that builds a means of livelihood, and their identity is invested in that sense. Material acquisition. And then some who are in that category, they're thinking a little more beyond just the material perspective. They want to know who they are in a deeper sense. So I'm being asked to speak about that topic in these 2 universities. And the people that are attending these university programs, they're not just doing their career, they're also there because it's the Bhakti Club or whatever the name of the thing is at these universities, because they want something more. However, that want something more, what's the definition of that something more? It's going back to the Bhagavatham verse for this morning. We have a king, we have sages, and we have demigods. And they're very elevated. So the university students, they aren't so elevated. Yoga, Indriya, Samyama, they don't have that sense, what to speak of day after day and year after year after year. So as all of you have, that discipline and that spiritual strength that comes with that discipline. And then, just a little sharing with you, before coming here, I was in Singapore. And while in Singapore, for 7 days, morning and evenings, means 14 classes, we were discussing Madhurya Kandambani. You probably know what Madhurya Kandambani is. It's a well-known book. It's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's taking the teaching of Rupa Goswami, the 9 stages of bhakti, and giving elaborate explanation of the 9 stages of bhakti, from Shraddha to Prema and in between. I'm bringing that up because we're doing, the sadhana bhakti according to Rupa Goswami's teaching in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, or our Nectar of Devotion. There's 3 platforms, 3 main topics in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu: sadhana bhakti, bhava bhakti, and prema bhakti. And how we're practicing sadhana bhakti. And so different, distinct from the demigods and the king and the sages. This is our present age, and we're following a process, standard process, and following the standard process of sadhana bhakti. For what purpose? The purpose of the Vedas. The purpose of the Vedas is to know Krishna. And beyond theoretically knowing Krishna, I'm mentioning this because it's in Madhurya Kandamini and it has relevance to the topic for this morning's 3 verses. And the generic people out there, just like last night, the university, ASU, and our Bhakti Club was invited as guest speaker at an event of the South Indian Vedic Club or Society, whatever it is. And the topic was Navaratri, because it's Navaratri season. And we're going to be speaking about that on Sunday here at the temple. What's the purpose of Navaratri? What's the purpose of anything Vedic? If we don't understand the purpose behind something, it's not likely we're going to get the experience of that purpose behind it. There can be, like sadhana, there's a practice that brings purification. And then beyond the purification, then what? Then bhava bhakti and prema bhakti. If we follow properly. If we follow properly. Just sharing from this Madhurya Kandamini some very strong points. We know from Canto 1, Chapter 2, Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the place where Rupa Goswami is taking these 9 stages of bhakti. And there's a stage where purification, the anartas, this is the anarta nivritti stage of sadhana, it's one of the 9 stages of bhakti, anarta nivritti. Then comes nishtha. So for those of us that are in the anarta nivritti stage and striving for the nishtha stage, lots of ISKCON devotees are in that position. I would say the students yesterday evening, at least the South Indian Vedic Society or Vedic Club, they're doing rituals according to the season because it's Vedic. That's nice. It's very nice. What's the purpose behind it? I mean, I didn't ask the president of the club, but if I were to ask the president of the club, what's the purpose behind observing these festivals like Navaratri? And I plan to mention it tonight, or excuse me, Sunday evening at the temple. What's the purpose? I mean, it's Vedic. So we do it because it's Vedic. But what's the purpose of the Vedas? What's the purpose of discussing Durga Devi? The 9 different features of Durga. That's Navaratri, and it's an important day in the calendar. You'll see when we come to Sunday evening, a very prominent acharya in the line of Madhvacharya wrote about Durga. I mean, he is a Vaishnav. So what do Vaishnavas have interest in Durga? Well, why do we do anything in our day-to-day lives? So it's to move progressively where the senses are controlled. Controlled senses means they're directed towards the satisfaction of the senses of the Supreme. Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam. Bhakti Ruchate. And that's sadhana. And how does sadhana become bhava? It's a long road. But that's the trail, that's the path that we're on. Sadhana leads to what? Leads to bhava, leads to prema. According to Madhurya Kandambani, I'm mentioning this because it's relevant to the topic here. It mentioned in Madhurya Kandambani that the stage of bhava marks where the lower modes, ignorance and passion, are completely eliminated, and it ushers in bhava, ushers in Shuddha Sattva, the platform of transcendental life, where the modes of nature are completely gone. So let's say it negative, the other flip side. Unless that point in time comes when we, sadhakas, become eligible for bhava bhakti, we're going to be influenced by the modes of nature. We'll say it the other way. When that lovely day comes, that sadhana becomes nishtha, becomes asakti, becomes ruchi, and then asakti. There's several steps that are waiting for us to be taken. The modes of nature are going to be influencing us. And we're meant to go beyond the modes of nature, we all know that. So we have to get to that stage. And Madhurya Kandambani describes the steps and steps and steps and steps to get to that stage. And then from that platform of bhava, where it's Shuddha Sattva, then the metaphor is used. There's 3 stages, like a tulsi plant. There's buds, and then there's flowers, and then there's tulsi seeds. So in the metaphor of Madhurya Kandambani, it's buds, and then flowers, and then fruits. The fruit is prema. So we're practicing sadhana to get to the stage where it's not just clean, but squeaky clean, like nishtha. Nishtha is a stage where there's still residual stuff, meaning attraction for the temporary, like here, the 2 demigods. Varuna is very powerful. Varuna is very powerful. Very powerful. But look, he became attracted to a society lady, a prostitute, in Mitra. So to get to the point where there, besides nishtha, where there's bhakti is so strong, there may be trace influences in the background, but they don't act because bhakti is so strong. Yoga Indriya Samyama. Prabhupada referred to that phrase hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. That's the definition of what we're doing, or what yoga is, any system of yoga. Without controlling the senses, it's not yoga. With controlling the senses, that's what yoga is. And yoga is controlled, the senses become controlled when bhakti becomes so strong that although there's residual tendencies otherwise, they don't act. Even in the presence of Urvashi. So the Bhagavatam is giving history, Puranic history, of events that actually happened, and it's to encourage us to be more diligent in the bhakti that we're given, because these other processes of elevation are inadequate. They're elevating. We can't bring the living entity back to life. But the goal isn't just being able to bring a living entity back to life. That power may be there with the demigods. The power may be there with the sages. The power may not be there with a sadhaka, the Hare Krishna sadhaka. So these personalities, they're very powerful. They're very elevated. Where do they get that power from? From the all-powerful. Because they have the desire for power. And they use that power. They're devotees. They use that power in service to, in this case, the sages. Ask the demigods, please bring Maharaj Nimi back to life. His body is in these bombs. Doesn't say exactly what it is. You know, in Ramayana it's a vat of oil, but here it says bombs, you know, wrapping the body in. My sense of what bombs means is medicinal material, leaves or whatever it is, that preserve the body so it won't decay. Whether it's this or that or the other, the body is lifeless because the soul has left the body. And the demigods have that power. Not just, you know, affairs of the material energy, but it's a great power. However, one who has that great power, one may go, wow, they're up there. It is true. Their powers are far beyond the powers of living entities on this plane. And yet, the process of bhakti is meant to carry us beyond that, at least beyond that attraction, and the kind of service that's directly meant for the satisfaction of the personality of Godhead. I mean, my appreciation for all of you here, your dedication to serve the deities, the cooking and the etc., etc., it's one of the 5 most powerful, potent activities in bhakti, along with the other things that you do to maintain your Krishna consciousness. It's just the words of encouragement is, keep going. Keep going. The strength that you get from controlling your senses by the strength of service to the deity and etc., etc., the sadhana has a higher purpose and destination. So it's more than just carrying out the duties nicely, and even with devotion. With devotion is the operative point. And then where's that bhakti, when done properly, where does it take one? It takes one through those other stages. I like Madhurya Kandamani because it gives a blueprint for how to get to where we want to go. And certainly part of what we want is to be steady sadhakas. So many of you are steady sadhakas for years, steady sadhakas. And then? And then? And then? So it takes a qualitative, not just a quantitative effort in devotion to get to the stage where you're not a demigod and you're not attracted by Urvashi. The verse number 7, no, the purport of verse number 6, the semen discharged by these 2 demigods was kept carefully in a water pot, and Vashishta was born from it. Vashishta was born from a water pot. We'll read the verse, translation of verse number 6. Maharaj Nimi, who was expert in the science of spiritual knowledge, gave up his body. Vashishta, the great-grandfather, gave up his body also. But through the semen discharged by Mitra and Varuna, when they saw Urvashi, he was born again. So two categories: demigods, powerful demigods, and Vishishta. Vishishta is one of the Saptarishis. Again, a little sharing. In the month of September, we went to Haridwar. And I learned a lot that I didn't know about how important is Haridwar. Haridwar is very important. And one of the details that we heard is that there's an ashram in Haridwar where the Saptarishis would perform their austerities. And Vishishta is one of the 7 rishis. And it's something like that during different days, during different manus, there's a caste of demigods and a caste of Saptarishis. Each manu appoints his Saptarishis. And so they may be different by name during different manu periods. But there's a position that's occupied. And the place where they did their austerities, one of the places they did their austerities was in Haridwar. But here's Vishishta. He's one of the prominent personalities in the universe. And Vishishta is born again. So the detail isn't presented, and as I sit here at the moment, I can't remember the detail. Does anybody remember the detail? Vishishta part 1, Vishishta part 2. You know, what was the reason? It just mentioned Vishishta gave up his body also. Anyway. How exalted are the devotees who come to the stage not only of Bhava Bhakti and Prema Bhakti, but they enter into the pastimes of Krishna. And in the entering into the pastimes of Krishna, they engage in eternal activities with Krishna. Whew. And that's our destination, that's the target. Then we have to keep going, keep going, keep going. Aside from the Brahma Tejas of maintaining your sadhana very, very nicely, keep going, keep going. That's the roadmap of bhakti. Our Vaishnava literature has these principles embedded within it. For example, in Nectar of Instruction by Rupa Goswami, up to verse 7 in Nectar of Instruction is dealing with sadhana bhakti. Then after verse 7, starting with verse 8 to the end, it's in this other realm that's beyond sadhana. And it's one of our essential texts, bhakti texts. And we are meant to keep going, keep going, keep going. So we need to know what's... When you put in your GPS, you put the destination as Krishna Loka. What's the route that's beyond this certain stage? I'm just mentioning this in different ways because the Bhagavatam is revealing that through the course of history, Puranic history, what's the real advantage of bhakti being properly performed? What does it look like? Or what's the not being completely performed, what does it look like? So these verses are describing all of that. At least to some extent, or just mentioning it by historical reference. When we read the Bhagavatam, when we read transcendental literature, it's important to know the different steps, and it's also important to know where the whole process is taking us. It's not just historical information, and you learn the historical information, and you have more information than the next fellow. I mean, that was my sense yesterday evening, ASU, this program. How many persons that attended that gathering have a real sense of what's the purpose behind, or those that will come to the temple on Sunday, what's the purpose behind Navaratri? Besides, it's a festival. And those who are followers of the Vedas, they observe the festivals that are within the Vedas. After we left, they had arti for Durga. And what was the consciousness behind the persons that were doing arti for Durga? Etc., 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 etc. Being Vedic is fine. It's not a demeaning comment about being the follower of the Vedas. And similarly, those of us that are engaged in sadhana bhakti, it's to be encouraged. And it's to be encouraged, where does it take us? And how to get there. Now we'll see what comes up next, because Maharaj Nimi left his body, and although he left his body, it's interesting, in the verse it says that they invited him to return to his body, but he's speaking. No, please do not imprison me again in a material body. But where's that voice coming from? Because he's not in the body, and he's saying, please don't imprison me in a body again. I mean, we'll find out, hopefully. I'll do a little research before our next set of verses from the Bhagavatam, this section. What do our commentators say? Where was that voice? Where was Maharaj Nimi? The body was in this bombed position, so he wasn't in this body anymore because he had left his body. Now he's speaking. And he's the next, text 9, Maharaj Nimi continued. It's a long purport. Mayavadis generally want freedom from accepting a material body because they fear having to give it up again. But devotees whose intelligence is always filled with the service of the Lord are unafraid. Indeed, they take advantage of the body to render transcendental loving service. In the long purport. So, I'd like to end just by this little short comment. As we're going through this and other sections of the Bhagavatam, it's very beneficial to keep in mind the big picture. There's this piece, there's that piece, there's the other piece, but how do the pieces fit together into the big picture? What's the big picture? The whole of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the big picture of the whole of the Srimad Bhagavatam is elaboration on the theme that Krishna is the source of everything. And then from that source of everything comes everything. And from the everything comes creation, and within the creation there's different entities, like demigods and sages and kings. And each of those creations are at different stages, as are we, in different stages of our devotional life. And what's the purpose of the whole thing? What's the purpose of the Bhagavatam? What's the purpose of Bhagavad Gita? What's the purpose of your deity service? What's the purpose of managing a temple? What's the purpose of life? What's the purpose of being a sannyasi and going from this place to the next place to the next place, and besides trying to be of service to the devotees? What's the big picture? It's nice to keep the big picture in mind while we're doing this and that and the other thing. It's meant to take us to Krishna, to the stage of pure devotion to Krishna. Not mixed, but unmixed. And it's a very high unmixed. Just one anecdotal thing. It's very clearly stated in Madhurya Kandamani is, one cannot get to the stage of prema if one has not achieved the stage of bhava. In the stage of bhava, it's Shuddha Sattva. Bhava ushers in Shuddha Sattva, means squeaky clean, no more passion, ignorance, influence, zero. Bhava Bhakti brings it. And in the description in Madhurya Kandamani, there's several things said in that whole section on Bhava Bhakti, but one of the references is that one who is on the stage of Bhava Bhakti, they like to conceal it. So I spent some time yesterday, a fair amount of time yesterday, researching examples where Prabhupada exhibited his Bhava Bhakti. So he did what looked like regulative. He did preaching work, and he did, traveling and managing and thising and thating and things like we do. But he was on the platform of Bhava Bhakti. Here's two examples. One example, a very celebrated example, was in Mayapur. I was present, so I can testify. Prabhupada was giving a morning class. And I'll send the link to you, Premadatra, you can circulate it amongst the devotees. There's a transcription of the whole lecture. Prabhupada did in Mayapur, the Mayapur festival. There's hundreds of devotees in the Mayapur temple in the early morning. And Prabhupada started speaking, in the course of the discourse, he started speaking about the same topic, that how important it's many, many, many things, but how important it is to come to the stage of spiritual perfection. And we're meant to do that. And then at a certain point, then Prabhupada was speaking about his, in humility, how he's not capable. And what happened was, it was just regular class. In the midst of the regular class, all of a sudden Prabhupada became overwhelmed with ecstasy or an emotion, an ecstatic emotion. And he stopped speaking. He became silent. And I was sitting in the front, so I remember this distinctly. The facial features of his body started to sag. His body started to move side to side like a tree blowing in the wind. And nobody knew what to do. So boldly, Hansadutta stood up. He was good with kirtan, so he took mridanga and very gently, very softly started chanting Hare Krishna. And after a few mantras of chanting Hare Krishna softly, Prabhupada opened his eyes, looked around the room. The facial features went back to normal. He didn't say anything. He got up and went to his room. The class was over. So you can read the transcription. It was, it was not so dissimilar from things that Prabhupada would say at other times. But, so externally is one thing, and then internally there's something else. He was on the platform of Bhava Bhakti while doing regulative activities. And there's another example. There's multiple examples. Well, one of them was in Atlanta, 1975, February 1975, Atlanta. For 2 classes in a row, rather than singing Jai Radha Madhava, Prabhupada sang Parama Karuna Pahudvijana Nitai Gaura Chandra. And then in one of the class, he spoke for about 2 minutes. And in those 2 minutes, he spoke about how merciful are Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. And because of their mercy, they are able to pick up people in this dark age of Kali to the stage of Prema Bhakti. And he stopped speaking. I discussed this yesterday with Devamrita Maharaj. He was in the classroom, from his eyes, like a syringe, some water splashed out of his eyes and got people wet. Seated on the Vyasasana. 2-minute class, and it was over. He was stunned, he was silent, he didn't say anything, he just got up off the Vyasasana, went up to his room, and according to Devamrita Maharaj, there was no discussion further in his room with anyone about what happened. My point is, the bhakti process is meant to take us to love of God. And love of God is the entrance into the spiritual world. In many, many, many cases, Prabhupada would make the description of going back to Godhead sound like a piece of cake. Like, just engage in devotional practice and go back to Godhead. Then you start filling in the details, and it's a lot of mercy to be engaged in devotional service, and to be engaged in devotional service in such a way that we're qualified to go back to Godhead. There's a bit more to the mountain than just engaging your sadhana nicely. Do sadhana nicely. It's not minimizing doing your sadhana nicely and doing your seva nicely. And then because ignorance and passion have to be eliminated, like zero. And Bhava Bhakti ushers Shuddha Sattva. So it's not like we should aspire to become ecstatic devotees. We should aspire to become pure devotees. And with that comes, bhava comes with it. But then it's an internal, it's not something else. It may be something else, but it's internal. Okay. It's 20 minutes before 9. Let's see if there's some discussion. My class was a little meandering, my apology, here and there and other things. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, just want to know our Acharya, what they mention about the Navaratri.
About
Navaratri.
Navaratri, right.
You're talking about our Acharya, right?
Yeah. Vijayadvaja Tirtha is the Madhvacharya author, or Acharya in his line, that wrote about Durga. It's mentioned right in the Bhaktivedanta purports of Srimad Bhagavatam. It's, just a cut and paste what I presented and will be presenting on Sunday. But his understanding and our understanding match. That is, there's the worldly, and then there's the Shuddha Sattva, the Swarup Shakti of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is known by different names. One of those different names is Durga. So he's writing about that one. But that one has Bhagavatam references to another Durga. That's this one, the one that people are familiar with, that gives material benedictions and curbs people from performing vices with her 10 arms. She creates auspiciousness with her 10 arms and quells people that are... So your question was, what did he write about? But you can find it right in the Bhaktivedanta purports. It's right in Prabhupada's books. Vijaya Dvajatirtha. You can look it up. And just describing names by which she is known, because of this quality, because of that quality, because of the other quality. For example, Vaishnavi is one of Durga's names because she's a dear Vaishnava. She's very dedicated to the personality of Godhead. So Vaishnavi, etc. So that's the context of what he wrote. Names that Durga is known by, based upon certain qualities. Okay, is that what you're asking?
My question.
That wasn't your question. What was your question?
My question.
Huh?
Yeah, that
That answers your question. Okay. Something else, go ahead.
Same thing, talking about the king, rishi munis, and later on, like demigods.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, everybody keep going upside down.
Yes, up and down.
Upside down. Their situation also like the same thing. Here also king, I had that same question. How that was that sound down. Still, there one more person like that. Two father and one son down. Their semen discharged and they put it in the pot and then later on Basita down. What was it? Two fathers, one.
No explanation. I'll commit. I'll do a little research today and see if I can find the answer to your question. There should be an answer to that question. It's a perfectly legitimate question. Because it can't be two fathers for one son. Something else?
Why Nimi Maharaj gave all his body, why they try to again take life back?
Why did they want him to come back again? Because he's a king, he's a good leader, and good kings are very valuable. There's no explanation beyond that. That it's for themselves and for him. For themselves, we want a good king. For him, please invite him to come back. We miss him, so he can be happy doing the service that he used to do. And you read the purport, and he understands very clearly the purpose of embodiment is one thing, it's service. So if one is given the opportunity to do service, why say no? Well, we'll read what he has to say about why he's saying no. But it's not, it's clear from the first little bit that I read, it's not, he's afraid of embodiment because, as Mayavadis are afraid of embodiment because it's entangling. That's not exactly his situation. So we'll read as we go forward. Why did they want him to come back? An act of kindness. Someone dies, please bring. It's a little bit like, it's not the same, but it's a little bit like when Lord Parshuram was asked by his father to kill his mother and his brothers. Understanding his father's power, he immediately did it. And then one benediction, bring them back to life. Without the remembrance of what happened. Like a long sleep, they come back to life. So, something like that. May Nimi come back to life again. Okay, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama